Welcome to EduSpace, the podcast series where we explore education systems and spaces in the 21st century.
Hello, EduSpace listeners. I'm your host, Aziza Jaffrey. I'm a third-generation Indian Canadian. I'm working as a curriculum developer and education researcher at York University in Toronto. And today I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts, Lucy Song and Sai Tipnis. Together, we are pursuing a master's in inclusive design at OCAD University. And to give you all some context and to help you get to know our co-hosts a little bit better today, I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. So without further ado, Lucy, take it away.
Hello, I'm Lucy Song. I'm a second-generation Korean Canadian. I currently work as an adjunct professor in the Faculty of Communications, Art and Design at Seneca College in Toronto. I'm excited to contribute my voice here today as someone who is returning to academia, becoming a student after a decade-long career in marketing and as a former creative director. We have such a unique group here, and I cannot wait to dive into our questions and unpack what ageism means to us as a group of people who are from different stages in our lives. But before we do that, let's get to know our third co-host, Sai.
Hey, I am Sai Tipnis, a free-spirited jolly being, recently immigrated from India. I am the black sheep of my family, often ridiculed for opting design as a career. I am a freshly minted graphic designer, graduate from the Symbiosis Institute of Design in India. I have completed my undergrad degree in visual communication in 2021 and have worked as a graphic designer and illustrator for a year. And I'm super excited to be here recording with you guys.
Okay, thank you both, and good evening, everyone. We are on the OCAD campus tonight. It is so awesome to be recording in person. I know I'm very excited for this episode. How are you guys feeling?
I don't know about you, but this is all very new to me, to be recording in this sound booth and to have all this equipment here. I'm feeling really pro right now. But all in all, I'm feeling pretty excited to be here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same. It's exciting, and I really am looking forward towards today's discussion.
Okay, so in this episode on ageism, education, and the intersections, we're taking a deep dive into how ageism manifests in education systems worldwide. Ageism refers to socially constructed negative attitudes and general stereotypes about people who are aging, and it considers how society is structured with an assumption that all people, and in our case, students, for example, are young, which fails to address the needs of older populations, or age-based expectations of students, a lack of mandatory curricula on aging in education systems, and dismissive attitudes towards younger students. And Lucy, you've mentioned this, that we all have very unique personal backgrounds, intersections, and lived experiences as educators and students. And we're really going to lean on those today and bring them into this discussion about ageism in education. So I think we should just jump right in with this discussion that we've been having a lot about conceptualizing and comparing ageism in education in the Indian and Canadian context. And Lucy and Sai, I'm not sure if you know this, but according to the World Health Organization, ageism is actually the most socially accepted and therefore prevalent prejudice in the world. And I'm really curious to know, what are your thoughts and experiences?
Yes, Aziza, ageism is very much prevalent in the thoughts, beliefs, and actions of the people to an extent where they cannot even recognize that they are being ageists. In fact, India is amongst the nations that account for the highest prevalence of ageism. According to the Global Ageism Report, at least 1 in every 2 people hold moderate or highly ageist attitudes. That's crazy. Even though ageism is acknowledged as a form of discrimination, there are no rules implemented to support the victims. India currently does not have any codified law on age discrimination, and it is so sad to witness this because, in a country like India, we are always told to treat our elders with reverence and treat our younger ones with love and respect their needs. And we strongly believe in karma, which means what goes around comes back around.
Sai, that's interesting because in contrast, living in Canada, I come across these phrases like, okay, they're boomer, or that's so Gen Z. So I'm coming into this discussion with the assumption that, North America would have been on the higher end of the scale, but I'm now learning that ageist attitudes in India are double what we're experiencing here. And just to give our listeners some context in terms of our legal rights in America and in Canada, in the US, the Age and Employment Act of 1967 put in place protection against discrimination for ages 40 and onwards. 40, yeah, 40. When I read this, I was taken a little back because I had that sudden moment of realization that I'll personally be crossing that threshold next year. In Canada, though, these protections began as soon as we enter the workforce at age 18, and in some contexts, it begins at 16. So we're now entering into a conversation of when does ageism begin?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good question. And I think, like you said, Lucy, it opens us up to a broader conversation about ageist attitudes. And because we are talking about education, we're discussing the context of education. I think these attitudes really manifest across an age spectrum, not just as we get into older age. For example, we often don't take younger students seriously. And then on the flip side, we have these age-based expectations of students. And I'm really interested to hear about what both of your thoughts are and how you feel this shows up in the education system.
To be honest, I think this is a vicious cycle. Firstly, individuals are not given the liberty to make their life decisions at a young age because, there are lots of age-based expectations from their parents, from the society to get a job and get settled. And I have myself experienced that. Back in school in the 8th grade, we were told to decide whether to take science, commerce, or arts as our major subjects. Now, you will think that it is quite easy because, students will select what they love to study and what interests them the most. But no, in my case, I was conditioned to take up science because it said that science is sort of a base of everything that we study. And to be honest, I ended up taking science because my decision was strongly based on my family's perception. And because I had literally no idea about other fields. I was scared, like literally scared as we, were introduced to these heavy concepts. But thank God I survived. Nobody really cares if the student is comfortable studying a subject or not. It is just a misconception. I feel that students have to work harder when they are in their teens and sort of enter into the rat race.
So that's interesting to hear you're having to choose an area of study in India at such an early age. I grew up here in Toronto, and when I was in school, we still had an optional grade 13, but we called it the Ontario Academic Credit, or OAC. Up until that year, we are pretty well rounded, and students are free to choose from a pool of subjects or disciplines. Now, with the removal of grade 13, more conversations, at least from my experience, of taking a gap year started to come up. Though there are mixed results in the research behind the benefits of taking the gap year. While the gap year is encouraged to students to go out and figure out, what field they want to choose and really prioritize how important it is to have some life experience before entering university, that underlying message that we need to stay on this path. We need to continue our educational journey according to the way that it's been mapped out for us.
I mean, what you just said, Lucy, is a totally different concept for me. Like in India, taking a gap year is a very big deal. It's neither appreciated nor supported. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who had taken a gap year just to, rethink about her academic path and to spend some time in meditation, take care of, her body, like her physical and mental health. But she ended up being depressed and feeling unworthy because of the constant nagging and pressure from her family. There was no positive outcome from this gap year. Such ageist attitudes and expectations push students into depression and mental health issues. Before sharing this next bit, I just want to add a gentle reminder that I'll be making a mention of suicide. So please take a moment to pause or skip this part of this episode if you need to, and take care. You both will find this shocking, but during the twin year 2020, a news article titled Student Suicide Epidemic in India was shared, and it highlighted the shocking truths that, over 86,000 students ended up their lives over the last 10 years. And I'm talking about this span from 2010 to 2020.
And just for context, how old were these students, or what was the range?
Yeah, these students were anywhere between the age of 15 years to 20 years. I think it's more around their high school.
That's really heartbreaking news. I thank you for sharing that, though. And I think as a student from the Indian diaspora, I can add to this conversation. We've had, conversations about how these expectations of education in the Indian culture can really translate over to families in Canada. And I think that when it comes to age-based expectations, and even this pressure that students feel to really focus in and narrow on a field, it happens very early on in their educational experience. I think it just happens at a more subtle and familial level. And I feel like the concern for choosing a professional path very early on is rooted in the ways in which our education systems are structured. So, for example, here in Ontario, there was a Ministry of Education report in 2009 that emphasized the importance of students integrating into a quote unquote global knowledge based economy for students' life success and for Ontario's economic success. So we quite literally prioritize market ready students, which I think ends up taking away from the beauty of education and what it can actually offer students in terms of, insights about themselves and the types of learning that they are interested in or that they want to do. It's really about, this idea of getting a job and being successful. And I think we could go on forever really talking about how these issues are rooted in things like colonialism and capitalism and ableism, all of the isms for that matter. We're talking about layers here, and I think that age-based expectations can also be really intimately tied to gender. For example, I've shared a story with you both about a peer of mine who's in her early 20s and off to do her PhD. And a lot of the feedback that she was getting from people in her social circle, whether that was family or friends or professors at the institution, was that you're too young. So, you need to make space to be a mom, you need to make space to be a wife. Essentially, you need to make space to take on these gendered roles. And so, in addition to kind of the cultural layers that come into play, there's this. I certainly think that there's a gendered layer in age based expectations and discrimination that manifests in education systems. And I think, Lucy, you can speak really well to this because you talk about returning to academia.
So there is this idea of aging out of many different fields, and in academia, I feel like it swings either way at different periods of the journey. Because I personally feel that there's more of a primal age of when you should do your PhD and things. Like you said, you could be too young, or I don't know if you could be too old to do a PhD, but there does seems to be some ageism around doing your grad studies when you're too old, or doing your undergrad when you're too old. I haven't done my PhD, so I can't speak to what that experience is like. But generally, I mean, as students, when we see an older professor come in, there's no real ageism. It almost seems appropriate, right? But that in itself is ageism, because then if you have the flip side is the young professor come in, and then you're like, who is this, and can I trust them? Do they know enough? Or even when I go into the faculty lounge, I walk in and I usually get, oh, are you lost? And then I'm like, no, I'm just going to my mailbox. And they're all like, oh, you're faculty, I'm so sorry. So you know experiences like that really do tell me how people perceive my age and what that means for me when I walk into a space. Yeah, I don't know. In the classroom, I have this weird feeling that I need to age myself, and I'm not sure why I feel like I need to.
Do you feel like that's related to having like authority in the classroom?
Yeah, not that I want authority, but I do want my voice to count or matter or have some weight. So I don't want my parents to kind of discount or erase my experiences and all the years that I put into my career. As much of a compliment, it is to hear, oh, you look 25, Lucy. I also feel like I get treated like a 25-year-old, which is not
Which
right.
is also ageist.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
which is not right either. And in that, someone who's young often gets treated in the workplace like they're not as competent, which isn't right. And even the narrative here, like I'm really speaking, I'm noticing that the ageism behind wanting to correct others that I am older than I appear, right?
Absolutely.
So
And I guess I'm curious about how, being three different students from three very different age groups or like age ranges. How did you come into the program? What were your thoughts coming in?
Okay. So I was totally scared, intimidated, confused on the first day of the college because I'm like, oh my God, like everybody is older than me. I'm the youngest, and they have so much experience, and I'm just like, what, 1 year out of graduation? And I was constantly asking myself these questions, like, whether am I in the right place, or is this the right time to be in this course? Will people even take me seriously while I speak? Because I have experienced ageism in India. It's so like deeply rooted within me. There's this one experience that I would like to share here, because I will remember this till the end. Lucy had once like texted me, because I was new in the country, new in the city, so she texted me, and the message read as Sai, do you have any other family in the city apart from us? Like, apart from us is like our family, our classroom. And that is when I felt really accepted. So yeah, that's when I knew that yes, I'm in the right place.
That's
Aww,
so
thank you,
sweet.
Yeah.
That's really sweet. I feel like I had the opposite experience. I had a lot of, I guess, flack from people, in my social circle. Thank God, not my immediate family, but, certainly my extended family, my friends, like even professors that kind of questioned my choice about doing a second master's because it wasn't this linear transition, into a PhD. And it was very much tied to this age-based expectation that once you're done your master's and you go right into a PhD. And I kind of questioned if I was ready for the commitment of a PhD, which is, it could be anywhere from like 6 to 8 years. And I think I had a lot of people in my life just really encouraging the PhD and kind of pushing it, because it was like, you're going to be in your 30s by the time you finish. And you don't want that. I really had to move against the grain and go against this age-based expectation that I was not going to do a PhD and I was going to pursue another 2-year program. That really brings us to this question about what do inclusive education systems look like? And I think we've had this conversation a lot about, as inclusive designers, we feel like we need to build in as much flexibility in our education systems as much as possible to really accommodate and to account for the different experiences that people have across the life course. For example, we've had conversations like Lucy about, how wonderful would it be if there was childcare built into like the student wellness to really accommodate for folks that are caring for children, for example. And I think that kind of brings me to this question about age and education and learning. So I just want to open the floor and, give us an opportunity to think about learning in our old age, just embracing that, maybe creating goals for that. What does that look like?
I don't ever want to leave. That's my problem. If I
You
could
and I
afford,
both.
if I could afford it, I will keep going, and student for life.
Yes.
And I will keep that hat on outside of academia, I hope, but I really don't see myself ever retiring. I want to be that 65, 70, 75, 85-year-old person who's, working with students day to day and living with purpose. And there's so much to learn from students and vice versa. And I think that is kind of that, golden classroom where you see all the intergenerational students working together and,
Absolutely.
collaborating.
What about you, Sai? What are your thoughts about the future?
So it's said that as you grow old you become wiser, and so I feel that growing, or aging in itself, is a very big learning, because you learn from your mistakes, then you learn from somebody else's mistakes, and life enlightens us at each and every step of our life, I think. So it's a journey that all of us should cherish at the end.
I love that, Sai. I really love that. I think that in a lot of spaces we talk about generational shifts in perspectives, and making generational change. And I would love to be able to do that, to share this idea that learning should not be and is not tied to age, and really addressing and perhaps just combating age-based expectations in education.
And I hope in by sharing our stories today, our intergenerational stories, that it creates an impact in those who are listening, and we talked a lot about what are things we do and the stories that we experience. And I think that this awareness now, the translocational stories too, the intersectional stories that we share too, those are so unique. The single stories don't account for, many stories, but there are parts of each of our stories that I'm sure our listeners can connect to and feel a little bit seen. And that's what I hope from today.
I think throughout our lives, all of us have been the causes as well as the victims of ageism. I mean, at least I have. And so I think this is my sincere request to, all the listeners that, we should think, respect, and speak with each other regardless of our, race, caste, sex, or age.
Absolutely. I think that's a wrap, folks. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Thank you to Lucy and thank you to Sai. Thank you to our listeners. As Lucy said, we are the EduSpace podcast, a team exploring education systems in the 21st century. Have a wonderful night, everyone.